years or so, I've been working in a variety of product owner and Scrum Master roles for Agile teams. Pretty much all of the teams I've worked in had some element of distribution within them, a combination of different types of distribution. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about some key communication challenges that distribution adds to software team development. I'm going to walk through a few examples of teams that I've worked with, some of the challenges that they had brought about by their distribution. I'm going to talk about some of the things that we did that helped alleviate some of those challenges. Then I'll finish with a few general recommendations that I think everyone can use to help strengthen the collaboration between distributed teams and hopefully that those teams work more effectively. Okay, so let's start with communication. Communication is one of the key foundations that help individuals turn groups of individuals into high-performing teams. Face-to-face communication is a really important way that humans use to build relationships with people. We use a lot of non-verbal cues, things like smiling and laughing and gesticulation of your hands, that all add to the style of communication that humans use to interact. When you make somebody remote, so the communication is done without necessarily being able to be face-to-face with them, you lose a lot of these non-verbal cues, and this makes communication much more challenging to do in a remote setting. Remote communication is also just more difficult to do. If you compare sitting in an office with co-located people, it's much easier to push your chair back, turn around to someone sitting behind you. So can you just have a quick look at this, because I've got a quick question. If you compare that when you're a remote team, you've got to find the person's phone number. You've got to probably find the phone in the office. You've got to dial the number and then wait for them to answer. It's a little thing that takes more effort to communicate like this. It's also a bit more stressful. So phoning somebody up, you don't know at that point when you're trying to speak to them whether they are even there, or whether if they are there, they're in a position where they're ready to speak to you. They might have only just gone to the office and still setting up their computer. They might not have had their first coffee of the day. They might be just come out of back-to-back meeting for the whole day, so now isn't really a great time to speak with. And these are all factors that you pick up subconsciously when you're communicating with people when they're in face-to-face with you. Individually, each of these things just doesn't sound like a very big and they're probably not, after phoning somebody isn't the world's most stressful event you can have. But they all add together to make the effort you can put into build a relationship remotely more challenging. What I want to do is look at, for example, how distributing people out of the co-located team really adds to the level of external relationships that we need to manage. So if we look at this is a standard co-located team. They're all sitting in the same office. If you look at external relationships that team needs to manage, there's only one relationship. We're talking about an individual in the team having to communicate with the team as a whole. Now, obviously all teams have a whole bunch of other external relationships they manage. Things like relationship with stakeholders, relationship with suppliers maybe. But I think those are external relationships that all teams have, regardless of how distributed they are. So for the sake of argument, I'm going to ignore those. I'm going to say a co-located team has an external relationship at one. So if we look at what happens when you move one of those people out to be remote, you make them bigger. If you look at the external relationships for this team, where you've got one remote person, the remote person's got 6 external relationships to manage in this example, one with each of the people in the co-located team. And then if you go back the other way, each of those people in the co-located team have got an external relationship they didn't have before with this remote person. And the remote person still got a relationship with the team. So in this example, you've gone just by moving one person and making them distributed. You've gone from an external relationship count of 1 up to 13. And this scenario gets worse the more people you have remote. So if you look at 2 teams now, you've got a split team. If you compare each individual relationship here, you've got team 1 has got, everyone in team 1's got 3 external relationships with team 2 and 1 with team 2 itself. The same is true the other way around. And the teams themselves have got communication. If team 1 as a group has to communicate with team 2 as a group, there's an external relationship that needs to be managed there. So in this scenario, you've gone up to 33 external relationships. And if you take it to the extreme where everyone is remote, so this is the same size team, but everyone is working in a different location, the external relationship count drops up to 49. So by just moving people out into different locations, you've massively increased the number of external relationships that each person in that team has to build and maintain. And if we use the fact that relationships are the thing that builds the team together, that gets teams working really well, you've added quite a lot of additional complexity to that team. It's not just external relationships that impact distributed teams. Another thing that really makes a big difference is time zone differences. So when you've got a distributed team, you quite often have some time zone difference between those teams. Taken to the extreme, you can have teams where the time zone difference is so large that there's really no workable overlap in a working day. So in this case, either one of the teams needs to change their working day so that they force some overlap in the day, or you have to rely on asynchronous communication methods like email. Email is never a great way to be sole way in a relationship with someone. Doing over email is not very effective way of maintaining a relationship. If you're looking at distributed teams, often another scenario you find, apart from time zones, is where you have some of your team are working from home, they're home-based. And one of the benefits of being home-based is it allows you to more easily manage your work around the rest of your life. So you find there's lots of people who will split their day, so maybe they start very early in the morning, work for a bit, have some of the middle of the day where they're not working and then work again later in the evening. Or they might shift their working day completely, so they start earlier and finish in the middle of the afternoon, or vice versa, they might start later and finish later. And what you're doing in this scenario is you're generating an artificial virtual time zone. So you have all the same challenges you have with time zones, even though you're within the same time zone. And when you've got multiple time zones, it's very difficult to find workable time where you can communicate and build up that relationship. The final challenge that you have with distributed teams is around cultural differences. Clearly this is not something that is unique to distributed teams, but with distributed teams you often find that team members are based in different countries, they've got different native languages to each other. And different native languages, even if you're speaking to someone who you can both speak a common language very well, you do lose quite a lot of meaning in some of the colloquialisms and slang that you use. And this is quite clear when you're talking to people who've got completely different native languages, but it also happens when you've got people who've got a common language, but they're separated by something like the Atlantic. So if you take the UK and the US, there are scenarios where there is misunderstandings that happen when you don't really expect it. I had an example a few years ago. I was giving a training course to a team of people in the US. And I was walking through on a presentation how a piece of software worked. And I said, in order to enable this feature, we need to tick the tick box. And I looked up and the entire room just stared back at me quickly. And I had to point out on the screen, no, this is what you need to press. And then look up and check the checkbox. was like, yes, check the checkbox. Oh, okay. I didn't realise that that tick and check, for me, they're basically synonymous, but in the US, they have a different meaning. So that led to confusion that I wasn't expecting. The other thing we find between different countries is there might be different standards in how they handle public holidays. So, for example, some Japanese companies tend to work over Christmas. UK companies, we generally don't work over Christmas. This isn't in itself a massive issue, but it does lead to a kind of challenge with overlapping times when you're trying to build those relationships. So I think altogether, there are kind of three key things that build together to make communicating with people when we're remote much more complicated and more effort for everyone involved. So it makes it much more difficult to build these tight relationships and build teams that are high-performing teams. So what I want to do now is to look at a few examples of team structures that I've worked on, to talk about some of the core challenges they had, and then what we did in each of those teams to try and mitigate some of the issues that we had with teams. So the first example is a reasonably old example. This was right at the start when I was working in teams that were moving from a more waterfall way of working into a Agile way of working. What we're trying to do is move into creating cross-functional teams. And we're working in an organisation where the developers all sat in a group within an office, so they all sat with other developers. And in the same office we had testers, and they all sat in another area of the office working with testers. And we had product managers who sat with product managers. So what we did when we built up these feature teams was we selected developers and some testers, the product manager, and moved them into a virtualized team. And we started at the same time, we started using standard Scrum ceremonies, so we had daily stand-ups, and we had planning meetings, and we had retrospectives. And we saw just by moving into a more of a cross-functional team and using those Scrum ceremonies that we improved the perceived quality that we delivered the software faster. However, what we saw was outside those ceremonies, there was still very little interaction between the developers and the testers. We found developers were writing code, implementing code, passing it to testing. Testing would look at it, they would inevitably find issues with that, reporting the defect reporting system, send it back to developers, and so we were finding we were communicating via a defect tracking system. So we looked at ways we could minimise this kind of reporting, and we decided we would physically move the developers and testers. We moved where they were sitting and put developers and the testers next to each other. And straight away what we found was the communication that happened day to day between developers and testers increased noticeably for us. And we started to find testers and developers talking more about potential defects before they got reported. And a lot of times we found that developers were able to fix defects before they'd even been written down and tracked in the tracking system, so we could start to save time. But when we looked at it in a bit more detail, we still found that there was still a bit of a them and us kind of dev to test thing going on. And we looked at the way we'd moved people around, and what we'd done when we moved the testers and developers to sit together, we kept the testers sitting together, and kind of put them next to the developers who were also sitting together. And to make that worse, we'd also put them the other side of a desk partition. So there was a group of developers who were sitting next to a group of testers, but there was a physical and a virtual wall between them. So the next stage is we had another desk move, and we mixed up developers and testers. We had developers sitting next to testers. And there was a little bit of kind of unease of fitness to start off with. But we found that by doing that, we started getting even more communication between developers and testers. We found that the testers were talking to developers just naturally more about what tests they were planning on running with the developers before the developers had really finished writing the code. So in a lot of cases we were able to completely eliminate some of the defects that were potential defects just by having that conversation while we were developing the code. Now I appreciate in this scenario this is a distributed team in the loosest sense of the word, and we can quite easily move things around. So in the second example, we've got a slightly different setup. We've got a co-located team of developers and testers in one office, and then we've got a remote product owner in another office. And in this example, the product owner was split across a time zone. Now the main challenge we had here was really getting timely feedback from the product owner back to the developers and testers. So as we were implementing features, we wanted to just bounce ideas off the product owner. Oh, do you prefer this layout or this layout? Or we're not really sure how somebody's going to use this particular feature. Do you think it would be better like this or like this? And because the product owner was a time zone away, we found there was a struggle with overlapping time to have those quick conversations. Another challenge we had is that the product owner travelled around quite a lot, and they were often not available when we were having our sprint review meetings. So having a sprint review meeting where you don't have the product owner involved has limited value. So the things we did here, we introduced a local product owner deputy. Now, the product owner deputy's role was to work day to day with each of the team and to answer a lot of the day-to-day questions that came up. They also owned prioritising the backlog and making sure the backlog was the sufficient granularity for the development team to be working with. And then, because we kind of almost replaced the product owner in that way, the deputy product owner had a regular one-to-one meeting discussion with the real product owner to make sure that the backlog changes that they were providing into the team aligned with the general roadmap that the product owner wanted to go to. And they had a chance to ask any questions they weren't really sure about, and they could be that single conduit back to the team. It's kind of not an ideal situation to have. I'm sure there's lots of people who question the sanity of doing this, but we found that it took away a lot of the day-to-day challenges we were having with the communication with the product owner. The other thing that we did in this team was to start recording our sprint review meeting. So we were already having our sprint review over a WebEx session. So we pre-scheduled all of our sprint reviews at the end of the year, and we started recording them. So pre-scheduling them meant that the product owner was able to manage their calendar to allow them to be available for most of the sprint reviews. But if for some reason they weren't available, then they could watch the recording and feed any feedback back to the team, either directly back to a relevant developer or tester, or back via the deputy product owner. In this scenario, we found that the product owner started, the real product owner, so the remote product owner started to get more trust building between the team and themselves. So we started to reduce some of any friction we had around balancing user features with technical features in the backlog. And we got the real product owner started to get a lot more interesting kind of everything that was going on, because they got this kind of slightly filtered view at a slightly higher level. So at this stage, I'm sure some of you are thinking I'm a bit of a fraud standing up here talking about distributed teams, when the first two examples have really been eliminating the distribution part. So I've got another example where we didn't eliminate it. So in this case, this looks very similar. We've got a co-located team, And in this, the co-located team's got developers, one tester and product owner, and we've got a remote tester. So here the challenges the team were really having was how do you bring a remote tester in a different time zone into the sprints effectively, where you want them to be interacting with developers and testers in real time. So whereas in the previous example, we were able to kind of record meetings and the meetings tended to be once a sprint. In this example, we really want to have within the day communication with the development team and testers. So what we started to do here was make really heavy use of Skype as our way of communicating. So we started to use Skype for the types of questions, the types of communication that happen between developer and a tester or a tester and tester that can be answered really quickly. So things like, oh, have you deployed the fix for feature X into the environment I need to test it, or is this feature ready for me to look at, or is this defect being fixed? So they tend to be things that you could Skype really quickly and then you could get a response back quite quickly. We also, a really simple thing we did, we moved our stand-up to the afternoon so they coincided with the different time zones. It wasn't perfect for the co-located team because it meant that the stand-up was in the afternoon, which it's kind of nicer for in the morning. But it's much nicer for people to do everything in the team than it is to have it in the morning. The other thing we noticed, we started to use Skype as our communication. It reduced a lot of the friction of actually being able to speak to someone. So before you'd have to remember or look up somebody's phone number to call them. With Skype, you can quite seamlessly move from a quick chat text conversation into an audio conversation with a click of a button. And because everyone had headsets, so this made that process much more straightforward. And we found there was a lot more conversations happening between the remote tester and the co-located team than we had before when we were just dealing with phone calls. It's at this point we also moved away from having a whiteboard with cards on it as our Kanban board, because that didn't tend to work very well across the Atlantic. So we moved to an electronic Kanban board and used that as another way of communicating status between the teams. Still got a bit of a love-hate relationship with electronic Kanban boards. I think there's something about a physical board that I think is almost magical, and I don't really know what it is. But having something that's got physical dimensions, it kind of means that behaviours change around that. But I think overall, having everyone in the team get to see the board is a more valuable thing to have than having it on a whiteboard. So my final example is a split team. So we've got, in this case, we've got developers and testers in one office, and we've got developers and product owners in another office. And the key challenge that we're trying to resolve in this example is we've got a distinct technology skill difference between the two offices. So one office has got really strong technical skills in one area of the technology stack, and the other office has got strong technical skills in a completely different area of the technology stack, and there's very little overlap between them. So what we did in this example was we started off each of the major pieces of delivery with a face-to-face meeting for people from both offices who got together to look at or to discuss the high-level objectives we were trying to deliver, go through the high-level features and make sure that everyone was aligned with the general things that we were trying to deliver. And then at the end of that week, we started prototyping one of the first features. And we tried mob programming for the first time. So we had a group of 6 developers and a few kind of technical architects who, it's been quite a long time since they wrote code in anger. So we had a group, a mixture of people, and we had a big screen and laptop. And we did some mob programming and found that it was a really great way of rapid prototyping a feature and getting a huge amount of collaboration between the different offices of developers. We started to get a real good, kind of a really interesting mesh of technical specialisms. So after that meeting finished, the next week, we found that the developers had started continuing this mob programming that they were doing, but this time they were doing it remotely over a screen sharing session. So we carried on doing this and found that this was a very good way of building the technical relationships between the developers. So you started to get developers understand a lot more about the technical skills each developer had. But we found that mob programming really was very good for rapid prototyping, but when we actually started to want to implement the real features, we wanted to get something that was kind of a bit smaller, a bit more manageable group. So we moved to pair programming, and we built our pairs so that there was always a pair that was in each office. So we had a pair across offices, and they spent generally the morning doing pair programming. And because what we found was pair programming over a screen sharing session is exhausting. It's noticeably more tiring than having pair programming when we're next to each other. So we tended to do pair programming in the morning, and then after lunch the pairs would split and kind of go off and do their own bits of development, and then they'd come back together at the end of the day and review their day together, and then the process would carry on. So we found this was a very good way of getting a good overlapping skill set. So that's a few examples of different types of teams that I've worked with different levels of distribution, different levels of challenges between them. And I think while, if you take any of those examples, there's lots of holes we could pick about whether the choices we made were really good choices for dealing with that distribution. We found that in all those cases, they all made a difference to how the team felt the relationship was being built. So what I want to do now is look at some kind of key recommendations of things to do if you're going to have distributed teams. So the first one's around instant messaging. I know I'm probably a few years behind the curve here, but if there's anyone out there that's not using instant messaging as a core way of communicating between people and their teams, then you should start now. The ability to move from a text conversation into an audio or video conversation really reduces a lot of the friction of being able to communicate with people. You can also see it also when people are available when they're online. And you can start a conversation in text, just say, have you got 5 minutes to talk about X? And then you know straight away that that person is going to be available and ready to accept your call. So it takes some of the stress away from starting an audio call, and the people you're speaking to then have got at least some inkling about what it is you're playing up about. It's also quite a good way of kind of just keeping teams generally aligned on the same topic, so you can have group chats that everyone can join into. You can bring people into a conversation if it's a one-to-one conversation. We say, well, actually, it'd be really good if Joe started to provide some input. You can invite Joe into that conversation in the same kind of way that you would if they were sitting in the same office. So that's instant messaging. Next up, meetings. Meetings are going to be an inevitable way of working, and I think they become more important as your team becomes more distributed. You need to find, you tend to have more formalised meetings because you need to get time, an appropriate time when everyone's available. Now, what makes a good remote meeting good are really the same key things that make a good face-to-face meeting good. But I think there's a lot of things that are just slightly more important where you can get away with a lot of bad practice in a face-to-face meeting and it still kind of works okay. When you start having a remote meeting, it becomes more important to worry about kind of making sure everyone is involved in that meeting. It's very easy, especially if you've got a meeting where you've got one one office has got a lot more people in it, and you've got a small number of remote people, it's very easy to kind of almost forget that the person is on the end of the phone. And as much as you keep trying not to do it, and you might feel terrible when you hang up and you've forgotten to say goodbye to the person who's on the end of the line. It does happen quite a lot. So you need to be, as a facilitator for those meetings, very proactive about pulling feedback in from the people who are remote. The other thing to bear in mind when you've got a remote meeting, it's quite tiring to keep track of everything that's going on when you're the remote person diving into a meeting, especially when the meeting's large. It's quite easy to have audio that is not good enough that you can hear everyone speaking really easily. So you need the people who are remote to be quite proactive about piping up and saying, actually no, sorry, you've got to say that all over again because I didn't catch a word of it because you're sitting in the far end of the conference room and I can't hear you. Because when you're in a room, you obviously can hear everyone fine, so you don't notice.
I'm a full-time remote worker, and the way I work with that is I refuse meetings being like only person on the screen. I ask everybody to have a headset. Every time somebody respects me and actually wants me to be involved in the meeting, it's a meeting not in the meeting room, but on the desk. Have you tried that?
Sure, yeah, that's a good way of working. We tried that. I found that works quite well if there's people are scattered in a lot of different places, but if you've got the majority of people in one location, then trying to encourage everyone to be on a headset is quite a difficult conversation to have. But if you can do that, then that's great. I think that's a good way of working.
You find generally that people that are remote feel that when you've got meetings and people on one location, that's still remote, you feel very excluded from the meeting.
Yeah, they do. And it's very hard work to keep them involved. Yes?
I helped this problem at my previous job by intentionally, so if were a lot of people together, they'd all go into a room, and I would stay virtual on a headphone somewhere else, and also making that person the moderator or the facilitator of the meeting helps. Because one, they can take on part of the burden of telling people, because if you only have one person remote, it's exhausting for them to have to remind people over and over again to speak loudly, as we've already experienced in this room with no amplification. People forget to speak loudly. And also, I did talk about this in the lead dev. Our verbal systems use pauses to indicate when it is time to speak, and those pauses are usually measured in fractions of a second and can be as long as the delay time on a remote connection. If you're not careful, this means everyone in the room who gets to hear the pauses right away will dominate conversation, and the person who's remote will never actually be able to talk, because by the time they hear the signal that it's okay to say something, someone in the room who got the head start has already jumped ahead of them.
Yeah, that happens a lot. I like the idea of having the moderator being remote rather than at work. Okay, so one of the things that people talk about as a way of removing some of the non-verbal cues that people get when you're on a remote meeting is to add video to the call. So I've been in a number of meetings where we've got or tried to have video, and I found if you can get good video and it works well, it does make it an easier conversation. You can see people a bit better. You still struggle to pick up like small details in what people are doing if it's a big group, but it does work very nicely. But I found that the counter to that is if you've got bad video, so you've got intermittent video or low quality video or kind of just patchy video, it becomes a much more significant distractor to the meeting than it is a benefit having good video. So I think if you're going to go down the video route, you need to make sure the video is working really well, or scrap it completely and not worry about it. While we're on those kind of lines, the other thing I see a lot is spending the first 5 to 10 minutes of the meeting watching somebody try to set up the system and make sure that they're getting audio and video and projection all working together. And while this is clearly a bit of a waste of everyone's time and it's a waste of money setting up a meeting, it also starts the meeting in a really bad way. You just fall into the meeting, and then it's quite hard to keep everything on track. The meeting just doesn't tend to run very smoothly. So having the ability to start a meeting slipping without very much kind of setup time is really important. The third kind of key recommendation is around physical things you can do. So clearly, if you can move people to have them together, then that's a good thing to do, and you should definitely try to do that. And bear in mind that even within an office, you still get some of the same issues you find with hundreds of miles of separation. So moving people that's feasible is an important thing to do. But I appreciate in a lot of cases, the majority of cases, it's not practical to move someone 5,000 miles just to have them sit with the rest of their team. So, but when you do have a really distributed team, it's really important to still have people meeting up face to face. I recommend at least quarterly having somebody from each of the remote sites kind of meeting up and going somewhere. And you want to make sure that everyone has got a chance to share that travel joy around, so that it's not always the same person travelling. That's quite hard to do if you've got one remote person. It kind of makes financial sense to send that one person over all the time. But if you've got a more distributed team, or you've got split teams, sharing that travelling around so that everyone gets a chance to see where the other office, the other team working in each office is a really important thing to do. You don't really need to have everyone travelling all at the same time. While it's useful and it's handy to have everyone in the same room, if you have kind of one person from each site going around once every month or once every quarter, that gives you enough overlap within the entire team that the relationships that you're slowly building up still stay strong enough. That kind of little bit of face time makes quite a big difference to making everyone's relationship a little bit more resilient to the pressures of having a remote relationship. You can also do kind of fun things that aren't work related, so some sort of cross-office competition that starts a different type of relationship with people. So we've done things with hackathons that have been between offices. You can do Xbox competitions where you have one office pitting against another office. And fancy football competitions, you can do that across different offices. Just something that kind of starts a bit more of a dialogue with people that's not just about the work they're doing. The last recommendation is around coding. So we found pair programming is a really good way of getting developers to start sharing some of the knowledge and getting more cross-pollination of skills between different groups of developers. Pair programming is much easier to do face-to-face, but it is something that is possible to do. It's quite feasible to do that remotely. Having a screen sharing session, doing that pairing, it is something that works, and it does help bring developers a bit more close together. So it's something that developers often prefer talking about technical things with developers than talking about kind of general kind of meeting things. So we found that a very good way of building developer relations. The one kind of gotcha that we found with pair programming is around screen sizes. If you've got significant difference in screen size between the two developers we're pairing, when you're doing it over a screen sharing session, you find that one of the developers has to either have the screen shrunk right down so it's tiny and you've got to squint for it, or they're constantly scrolling around the screen to find things. So you need to make sure your screens are at least in the same ballpark size. So that's a few kind of general recommendations I've got for people setting up distributed teams. I think we'll start making teams kind of communicate and work a little bit better together. So, in summary, every time you add distribution to any team, you increase the amount of complexity within that team. This complexity can lead to lower performing teams. Tooling does help, but it doesn't remove the need to have some sort of face-to-face time between each developers. between each of the people in the team. This helps strengthen the bonds between everyone, and strong relationship bonds help to minimise any of the impact that you have from poor communication that happens maybe in a local session. So I think with a little bit of effort and a bit of time, you can build remote or distributed teams that are really high performing just with these kind of simple steps. Thank you very much.